Hello, I'm Father Mitch Pacwa, and welcome to EWTN Live, where we bring you guests from around the world. And tonight, we'll be speaking with two experienced human rights attorneys about preserving the sacredness and the integrity of human rights around the world over against the secular, often atheistic, and relativistic ideologies that we see in the world. And we'll discuss how the Catholic Church can influence human rights developments internationally. First, I want to speak briefly with EWTN's Director of Acquisitions and Co-Productions, Mr. John Elson, because we have an interesting new program premiering later this week. John, what do you have for us?
Well, it's good to be with you, and I wanted to let our audience know that on Friday, April 16th at 4 p.m. Eastern, we'll be debuting a new documentary entitled All or Nothing, Sister Clare Crockett. Sister Clare was born in 1982 outside of Belfast in Northern Ireland, and she had a tremendous desire at a very young age to be very famous. She wanted to be world famous. She was a tremendously dynamic and gifted actress, and she had great success early on in life in both television and films. Unfortunately, with that fame, she also embraced the drinking and drugging aspects of the darker side of fame, and that continued through most of her youth until she was invited on a trip to Spain, which she thought would be an opportunity to continue her partying lifestyle. Turned out to be a religious pilgrimage. She felt obligated to go, and during the Good Friday liturgy, as she kissed the wounds of Christ's feet, she had a profound sense that her sins had caused those wounds, that wound and the other wounds to Christ. And that began a process which eventually led her to join the Servant Sisters of the Home of the Mother, which is a Spanish religious order. She then served the youth in that religious order in Spain, Jacksonville, Florida, and in Ecuador. And unfortunately, on April 16th, 2016, she and 5 other young postulants were killed in an earthquake that collapsed her school. Oof. And I think the legacy that's reflected and expressed in this program of Sister Clare is that she really sought to live the words of our Lord in Matthew 22:37, to love the Lord your God with all your mind, heart, and strength, particularly, and your neighbors yourself, and our Lord particularly in his presence, his real presence in the Holy Eucharist and in the Blessed Sacrament. So she lived that, and thankfully, with great tirelessness, and her legacy, thankfully, lives on EWTN, not only through this program, but she also appeared in 2 children's series that we have as part of our offerings, one of which is entitled Hi Lucy, where she plays a young puppet who speaks with Sister Grace with some really enjoyable catechetical discussions. That series, again, Hi Lucy, is available on our on-demand page, which people can access, our viewers can access on our website. And each Monday at 4:30 Eastern, on Mondays, we have Lucy and Friends, which is a longer version, a 30-minute children's series. So we were very thankful for the opportunity to bring this content to our viewers, and we pray that Sister Clare and her example will bless all who watch it.
Excellent. Thank you. That sounds very, very good. John, we appreciate that, and we'll be back with you in just a couple of minutes with tonight's guests, so please stay with us. Welcome back. Our guests tonight are both law professors from Naples, Florida, where they teach at the Ave Maria School of Law. Matter of fact, a law school that even gave me an honorary doctorate some years ago. Among their many areas of expertise, they specialize in the field of international law and human rights. Very important area. And they're here to enlighten us on how individual Catholics and the Church as a whole institution should address human rights issues and situations around the world, and that we actually have to work to improve them as well. So please welcome the director of the International Center on Law, Life, Faith, and Family, Professor Jane Adolphe, and the president of the International Solidarity and Human Rights Institute, Professor Brian Scarnecchia. Welcome, both of you.
Thank
It's good to have you.
to be here.
Very much. And, I guess I'm in a very thin line, something of a colleague of your law school. I gave the commencement a few years ago and received that honorary doctorate, which I was very, very proud of. And I especially enjoyed meeting the law students. I have a very fine group of law students, and that speaks well of the faculty, obviously. I was very impressed.
That's what we hope.
Yeah,
That's what we hope.
No, I'm sure it does. They were quite good, and I enjoyed that time with y'all. This issue of human rights is a hot topic right now. People are talking about justice and rights a lot. And yet some of this is also involved in a variety of problems. Where are we in this question? What is the church supposed to do?
Well, a good starting point is Pope Benedict the 16th, his address to the UN General Assembly, and it was on the 60th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and that's a United Nations resolution, and going back to 1948. And in that, he had talked about the foundational issues of human rights and how there are different concepts of what that foundation is. And he says that it is the language, a common language, and that there is this ethical substratum. It is an ethical substratum in terms of how we talk about the issues on the international relations. And he said that we have to go back to the very foundations of human rights, what they mean, the legal anthropology, the golden thread, natural law, and that we have to support the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and its foundation.
I think it's worth pointing out that the Declaration on Human Rights in 1948 was very much a response to the worldwide shock that had been induced by World War II. The concentration camps run by Nazi Germany, and also the prisoner of war camps and concentration camps run by the Empire of Japan.
Right.
And widespread human abuses. And there were limits to what they could say because Soviet Union, which was communist, had a permanent seat and could veto things in the United. But there's a lot that they were vaguely referring to there. So there were huge human rights violations that shocked the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I don't think you can underestimate the importance of that shock.
Right.
And so they wrote up this bill, not Bill of Rights, but this Declaration of Rights. It seemed very close to much of our idea of rights in our Bill of Rights as well, isn't it?
I'd let Brian take that.
Well, it is. There's a couple of generations of human rights. Political human rights, the right to assemble, to participate in the political process. That's primarily what our Bill of Rights focuses on. But the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is a little broader. It includes economic and social and cultural rights, the rights of family, the rights we also have in ours the rights of religion.
Right.
But one of the key things that Mahatma Gandhi, who in a symposium afterwards was asked, what do you say a few words about human rights? He said, his wise old mother said, a human right that is not linked to a human duty is not worth fighting for, is not worth defending. And that linkage between human rights and duties, fundamental duties, is what seems to be amiss today.
Yeah. Let me just read from Article 1 on that, because we've got that here. Because it gets at something really basic, more basic than our Constitution, which assumed this truth from the Declaration of Independence. But in Article 1 says, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. And then in number 3, everyone has the right to life, liberty, and the security of the person. So it derives from, it's, you know, some of the wording is linked to our Declaration of Independence as a statement of real basic human rights. And yet this is still a problem, isn't it? You know, that people still are experiencing the loss of these rights, and there are a lot of people not exercising the responsibility associated with these rights.
Right. So this is one of the things that the church has been really strong about in talking about rights being correlative with duties. Looking at that first article as being endowed with reason and conscience gives certain characteristics of the human person, because in international human rights law, it's commonly thought through the International Bill of Human Rights. So we are talking about rights that derive from inherent human dignity. What is that? Something unique about the human person. So that's reason and conscience, and this idea that we are called to know the truth. We're leading somewhere to know the truth, and then to respond to an interior call to goodness. In fact, a document that was put out by the Pontifical Council for the Family not only talked about inherent human dignity, but by right choices, right reasoning, good actions, there's acquired dignity. And so you're getting into a rather capacious understanding that's consistent with Christian anthropology, not perfect, because we talk about the image and likeness of God as being our uniqueness in more of theological terms.
Yeah, and the United Nations could not use, say, biblical language, like you're created in the image and likeness of God. That would offend many different people. You know, Muslims don't have that in their theological tradition, and neither would Confucianists nor Buddhists, because they're agnostic about God's existence. They don't say there is, they don't say there isn't a God. They don't know, but this would not be something that you could hold universally the way the Bible would say it. Exactly. But they derive this from human reason,
right,
and reflection, and what we call basically natural law.
Exactly, exactly.
Maritain, Jacques Maritain, the French philosopher, neo-Thomist, was behind the drafting of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Some 36 experts from around the world are brought together, and in a symposium afterwards, they all contributed their reflections. And one of the things he said was, I was talking to a delegate, and they said, yes, we agree upon that list of rights, as long as no one asks us why. That's when the argument begins. The foundation of human rights.
Yeah, why is that an argument?
Well, because are you going to say the foundation of human rights is the image of God? Are you going to say the foundation of human rights is a Kantian notion of autonomy? Are you going to say that the foundation of human rights is something bequeathed by the state? You know, there's a lot. So everybody can agree on the rights. No torture, a right to life. Why? Everybody gets nervous about the why.
Right.
And so this is why Pope Benedict and John Paul II, and also you have professors and scholars like Harvard professor, law professor Marianne Glendon, that has been really working on not only to solidify this foundation, and she had done her first article on it was pursuant, I think, towards a book that she did on Eleanor Roosevelt, but she did a seminal article called Knowing the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, where she went through the drafting process in detail and talked about René Cassin, which was a civil lawyer, and how he really took this list that was done in a preliminary fashion and put it together to have it meaning, and looking from the preamble paragraphs and talking about inherent human dignity, talking about unity of the human family, equality between men and women, which during this very upheaval about people's identity, sexual identity. It refers to equal rights between men and women. It's not men, women, and other. And then when you pull in this, okay, inherent human dignity of the human person, where is the characteristics of the human person? You're in Article 1, reason and conscience. And this idea that you're born free and equal, it's a moral birth, because we are not born into equal circumstances.
Right.
And right now, you'll see on the international level that the article is frequently cited, and what is cited? We are born free and equal. The endowed, that's implying a creator, with reason and conscience, is continually dropped. And
why do you think that is?
well, it's because they don't want to have a natural law foundation, because one of the key key articles is Article 16, where it's fleshing out the other part of the first article that talks about this living in a spirit of brotherhood. Well, there's no other place that's come out greater than the natural family. And in Article 16, it's the natural family, the fundamental group unit of society.
Yeah.
Okay, that excludes same-sex marriage when you're talking about the natural and fundamental unit of society, and the way that article unfolds. And so what you want to do is you want to start chipping away at the foundation. And eventually, they're going to want to amend it, if that's even possible, and try to get maybe women, men, and other. I mean, the way that they've dealt with it so far, those that disagree with this kind of concentration on the foundational principles, is to actually, during negotiations, to cite every other document but that one, or put it in a list with other documents that are non-binding. But one could argue why the Universal Declaration, at the first point, they thought it would be mere moral principles and will follow up with 2 covenants, which will be binding. It didn't happen that way. There was a lag time between 1948 and 1968 when the other 2 covenants were ratified. Within that time period, it was cited so many times and looked to so many times that it took on a customary international law. So you could argue that it is binding based on this source. And so that's why the Holy See is simply going back to that declaration, because of that Article 1. And it should also be noted that the Article 1, you had the Professor Charles Malik, who was a Christian philosopher, I believe he was from Lebanon. At the beginning of all the conversations within the different committees, they were, to get to this, he had always been asking philosophical questions. How do we talk about human rights? What is man? Who is man? How can we even start the conversation? And so that's why we have that good Article 1.
Yeah, and again, just to remind folks that Article 1 says all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Obviously, people are not born equal economically, but to have the right to freedom and equality and dignity, this is very important, and they are endowed with reason and conscience. This is recently, as a matter of fact, just yesterday, I was on a radio affiliate, Teresa Tomio's program, because one of the atheists, Richard Dawkins, is making a lot of noise again. And he's someone who is saying there is no such thing as free will. Said, you know, he wants to deny the existence of free will and say human beings, and he says human beings are like a machine.
Determinist.
And if they do something wrong, then you just have to replace a part.
Right.
Or replace the machine.
The crisis of
I don't know what he means by replace the machine.
Yeah.
He didn't specify, but using machines as a model for understanding human nature. Machines which humans made. We manufacture and invent those machines.
Right.
And to make them a model of us
Right, there you go.
is backwards.
right.
They are a model that derives from us, not a model what we're like.
So there's a scholar, a colleague of mine in Poland, and we've been having this debate for almost 15 years now. And he just wrote an encyclopedia entry wherein he has challenged the church's perspective on human rights and claims that it has become, and he defines human rights as subjective rights, and talks about how it can mean anything at any time, but it's driven by this radical individualism who has as a target, or has as a target, as to deconstruct our society and eliminate our social institutions. And that's when you start looking at some of these riots. And so I looked at his paper.
You mean the riots in the United States?
Yes, but there's been also riots in Poland.
Yes.
So he's looking at that. He finished it. So he's given up on the concept of human rights per se. He thinks that it was probably wrong in the beginning, and it went off further track, and commends the Holy See and the Church for trying to bring it back on track. But he's very negative on what's happened now, and his paper doesn't go on to say where we go from here from his perspective. In fact, I sent him an email and I said, okay, where do we go from here if this is what the story is? But I understand the frustration of some of the scholars that are seeing, no matter how long you've talked about the foundation, you keep on talking about the foundation, and Marianne Glendon is a good example of that. I've also done my work on that, and then you look back for 20 years, and we're not in that direction at all.
Maritain pointed out that human dignity was supposed to be the tuning fork, as he put it. It was as close as he could come to natural law. He couldn't use that word, but he said human dignity, and everybody said, yeah, human dignity. And that would give proper perspective, proper tonation to all those list of rights. But the trouble is human dignity has been interpreted in a Kantian way, in a grotesque Kantian way.
But by Kantian, a lot of folks don't know what that means.
Immanuel Kant, Enlightenment philosopher, contrasts autonomy with heteronomy and says that only autonomous actions free from external coercion and internal desires, only those kinds of acts are truly dignified and bear human dignity. And so this is where those followers of this grotesque reading of Kant, because it's not necessarily the true reading of Kant, but his writings lend itself at some points to this, they say that, oh, you see, if I freely choose an abortion, I am acting autonomously, whereas if I forego an abortion for fear of societal sanction or religious sanction, I'm acting heteronomously, and not, that action is not worthy of human dignity. So poor Maritain, the word that he had hoped that would ground human rights in something close to the natural rights tradition, has been now used as an excuse to introduce this whole new generation of SR rights, these ad hoc rights, abortion, contraception, euthanasia.
I think it's very important for folks to understand that, because we see that idea from Kant all over the street, that nobody can tell me what gives me my freedom or dignity. I choose it. And I define myself. And I can redefine myself.
Exactly.
Yes.
And even
any
my
way
own
I
sex.
want.
Yes.
And I can, my gender, my everything. And we had one lady who was, quite Scandinavian, Western Europe, claiming to be an African American when she wasn't at all. Okay. But it's that attempt to, I will redefine myself because that's the identity I like better.
Right.
Well, then you start saying that I determine the rights, and the risk that this Polish professor is bringing up, I think, is that everybody will then say, look, it's chaos, so let's get somebody to just bring order.
Yes.
This is a constant risk when you have everybody running to define their own freedom and their own rights.
Right.
And chaos results, the people look for an answer to dictators.
Interesting.
This in Italian cities, they had freedom, but it lent itself to chaos, so they kept electing dictators, podesta, who would be in charge, to just take charge because we can't really handle our freedom. Same thing happened in Athens. And Plato warned about it. This is part of human history. And we've seen that chaos show up in modern times where dictators take over and just make decisions on their basis.
And so this is the question I'm asking myself with the BLM movement is that the point of maybe money coming in to claim that there's no doubt we've had racism in this country, and we've also had slavery, which is from day one in our civilization and global. And so you wonder where the money's coming in to fund some of these activists, and whether the whole point is to lead it into civil disobedience completely, and then a dictator moves in.
Yeah.
I mean, is that being funded from outside? Is that partly funded but from outside? Totally? I mean,
all we can say at this point is that there's a huge amount of funding. I just saw that there was a report that the foundresses of Black Lives Matter have gotten, tens of millions of dollars in spending on houses and stuff. So there's money available to them, and where it's coming from, I don't know. But
it's an interesting question.
It is. But and then why? Why is that being funded, and what is going to be helping the places where the riots have taken place? Is there just self-expression that destroys everything around it, or are you trying to correct and help these situations? This is how do we help?
Right. So, I mean, one aspect of this is to see that how many people during the daytime are trying to do something about this. Are they using the courts? Are they using every means available versus the ones that comes at night? And that's something to consider. I used to be a prosecutor, so I remember that we had a curfew in my family. It was nothing happens good after 12. So those things, those rules that people have in terms of families, and you wonder why all of this happens at night, some of the most destructive things that are happening. And, I have a lot of respect for those people that are trying to do something through the legitimate avenues that we have, and they should be.
Martin Luther King Jr., he linked civil rights with, and especially civil protest, civil disobedience, with a duty to convert the oppressor.
Yes.
Interesting.
And it wasn't, he said, the means matter. Also, Mahatma Gandhi said, the means matter. If you use violence, you can't create the beloved community. It has to be through taking onto yourself as a victim, in a sense, the injustice, and that will turn around and transform the heart of the oppressor, and only that can create the beloved community.
And the influence of Mahatma Gandhi on Martin Luther King Jr. was very profound.
Yes.
He had traveled, Martin Luther King Jr. had traveled to India to try to understand more deeply, what that philosophy meant. But Mahatma Gandhi also had said that this will only work when you have people who have basic decency in them. So he had admitted in the 1930s that his methods could not work in Nazi Germany.
Interesting.
Because with their ideology, there was no conscience to which you could appeal.
Interesting.
But in various other places, especially where there was a religious conscience already formed, then their methods could apply. But with atheistic, like Soviet Union, never could have worked, and Nazi Germany. But it could work in British India or in the United States.
You saw that play out in people power in Manila in the Philippines. There you had a religious culture, and the Filipinas standing in front of the tanks stopped them.
Right.
But
Nuns holding rosaries.
Nuns holding
Yes.
Stop
rosaries.
the boys in the
Yes.
But
tanks.
just a
Yes.
few years
Yes.
later in Tiananmen Square in China, it did not stop the tanks.
Exactly. Those boys didn't pray the rosary. No. We're going to take a break. We'll come back. Want to get some of your comments and questions on this very important and very lively issue today of human rights and justice that we're trying to see and develop and move forward. So please stay with us and give us your questions and comments. Thank you. All right, we are with Professor Jane Adolphe and Professor Brian Scarnecchia from Ave Maria Law School, talking about human rights and the need to develop them better, have a better basis, and develop justice. So thank you for this discussion so far. And also the role of the church. There's a lot of tension right now between the church's role in trying to evangelize and get into certain places and yet deal with the issue of rights. China being a classic case right now. The Vatican has tried to make some, accommodations to the Communist Chinese government, which is run by the Communist Party. And yet there are a lot of human rights abuses, very famously of the Uyghurs, Muslim people in Western China, but also of Catholics, that they're experiencing a lot of persecution right now. How do we negotiate this?
Well,
because you used to work at the Vatican, and I'm sure that these were issues that were very important.
There's been a long-standing, obviously difficult road with the Holy See in China, and what I've been reading in the certain sense of those scholars, for example, like Nina Shea, who's with the Hudson Institute, and she's the director of the Religious Freedom there. And she's been pretty critical of it, and that there's been no real statement from the Holy See on the persecution of Christians, and that there's a silence. And not only that, she also highlighted the fact that when the document was mentioned, or the agreement was mentioned by the Holy See, that there is an agreement, it was never reflected by any authority or any public statement from the Chinese government. She also talks about...
So we understand this.
Yeah.
The churches say, we got an agreement. The Chinese are holding their cards close to their chest, the government people.
Right, as there's increasing persecution of Christians. Yep. And if you go on the internet, you can Google, Chinese destroying churches. You can find all kinds of different pictures. Also on the forced abortions, there's all kinds of pictures of the women being forced to abort, and they're lying in their bed, and the fetus, which is obviously dead, is right next to the woman in her bed, and it's to terrorize her, don't bother doing this again. And those pictures are available for everyone to see on the internet. And so you've got these abuses. And then Nina Shea's been pretty vocal about the abuse of young persons are not able to be educated, not able to enter a church. So it's illegal. So she has done some articles on that, and there's been no one speaking out about that. And we know of the parental right to educate morally and religiously your children, it predates the state, and one of those is religious freedom. So it becomes this huge religious freedom issue, and this is what Pope Benedict really said and highlighted in his address in 2008 to the United Nations, is that religious freedom is one of those freedoms that actually can help you cultivate this human rights culture that you want to, and he's talking obviously about a proper culture based on the natural law perspective.
Yeah, this was something that Pope Benedict had said to the United Nations General Assembly back in 2008. Matter of fact, on the April 18th, it's just, almost the anniversary. And it says, he said, let me give him a quote, "It should never be necessary to deny God in order to enjoy one's rights.
Yes.
The rights associated with religion are all the more in need of protection if they are considered to clash with prevailing secular ideology or with majority religious positions of an exclusive nature. So full guarantee of religious liberty cannot be limited to the free exercise of worship, but has to give due consideration to the public dimension of religion, and hence to the possibility of believers playing their part in building the social order." This is a full statement about the importance of religious freedom as the basis for understanding the question you raised about dignity.
You know, in the year 2000, I was in China, and a Catholic underground bishop on the run shows up in our hotel room in a fancy hotel in Beijing. They had the government was forcing him to denounce Pope John Paul II's canonization of those 30 Chinese martyrs and heroes for the faith. And he said, "I need time to temporize, I need time to think about this." And while they were thinking about it, he scooted. And he'd already done 20 to 30 years in prison. And he shows up, and it was the scariest thing, Mitch. We're all there inside with him. He's saying Mass for us, and all of a sudden there's this on the door. I never experienced anything like that. His heart just stopped. And we opened the door. It was the maid. Oh my God. But all of a sudden, that feeling of being censored, canceled for your faith, I mean, canceled in a huge way. The idea that there's religious freedom in China is laughable. And I think Cardinal Parolin was, he wanted a concordant, the Secretary of State.
He's the Secretary of State for the Vatican.
He was counseled that there should be, that the Chinese would just use this politically, but I think his mind was, and perhaps Jane can speak to this, like with the Concordat with Hitler, or with Germany before the Second World War, it was an attempt to try to negotiate some free space for Catholics. That was the good intention.
I don't know, I mean, I have a maid story, and I also have a China story.
Well,
so
okay, because I also want to get to some calls, but go ahead.
So I was in Beijing at a conference, and the maid is the problem. So when I went up there, she had already gone through all of my things, and I caught her in the middle, and I asked her to leave, and then there was the man outside, and she had opened up all my gifts. She knew where I was going. So yeah, there's no freedom of religion. I was in the Friendship Hotel, by the way.
Let's take a call from Thomas in Tennessee. Thomas, how are you?
I'm doing well, Father. How about you?
Doing fine, thanks. What's your question today?
Yeah, my question is for Dr. Scarnecchia and Dr. Adolphe. I'm wondering if they find it difficult supporting human rights in places like China and other countries throughout the world when we haven't removed the plank from our own eye, namely abortion.
That question came up in the Philippines. It was almost put to me like that. They says, "Why are you here talking to us in Manila about, a right to life and from conception to natural death, when you are one of the worst? Your country is one of the worst purveyors of abortion from all 9 months." And who saved me from that, Mitch, was the sponsor, the host, Father Kahilig, said, "Oftentimes, when there's a poison or a harm, the remedy is found right where the poison is too, the antidote. And then I referenced the people that were going to jail at that time, you know, in the rescue movement, that were willing to put their lives on the line to. So you're right, the caller who's called in, it is difficult. Most people assume in the United Nations when they meet an American that we're the kind of typical American, that a woman who's there is a feminist and a radical feminist. And they're very edified to find Americans that are as faith-filled as they are, and then we are able to really give a good witness.
And especially in a place like the Philippines, which is a very Catholic country, when they see so many of our Catholic politicians who identify as Catholics in public, but are very adamantly pro-abortion and become increasingly pro-abortion. It's a big scandal.
Under President Gloria Arroyo, we were going to meet her personally in the White House of the Philippines, and I called my colleague, the president of the Society of Catholic Social Scientists, Steve Crace, and I said, quick, Steve, we need a statement from a scholarly group of Americans saying that she should veto the sex education coercive abortion policy that Congress, the Filipino Congress, is putting forward. And I was able to literally hand deliver it to her, and it got to the bishops and it was read. And because it was from Americans, you know, their social scientists are as intelligent as ours, but because we were Americans speaking out in favor of freedom of religion and a culture of life, it actually was one of the nails in the coffin of that bill, and it did not pass at that time. So Americans have a good ability to strike a blow for liberty and justice.
Or if they don't, we see, for instance, in the Clinton administration, the Obama administration, and I think this administration is going this direction, that we tie foreign aid to abortion. If you want foreign aid, you have to let us teach your women how to kill their children in the womb.
Right.
That's the bottom line. We have another caller. Hello, Reba?
Hi, how are you?
Fine, thanks. Where are you from?
Hillside, Illinois.
Okay, and what's your question?
Well, I would like to know who's protecting the unborn right to the children who are in the womb. With so many lawyers there, you could stick up for the unborn human beings that have absolutely done nothing to nobody.
Right.
Okay, so the rights of the unborn, one of the things I'm particularly proud of in this country is that there is a strong voice, and I think of always Father Pavone, who actually, I think, built this whole machine that you can talk about the rights of the unborn, and you do it, and there's a lot of money behind it, and there's a big voice. Now, I'm Canadian, we don't have that voice in Canada. There is not that big voice in Italy, certainly not in China. In Vancouver in BC, which we call Little Hong Kong, for the affectionate, we do have, because you have to make a distinction between the Communist Party and the Chinese people themselves.
Absolutely.
But we saw in Vancouver photographs and platforms advocating for a one-child policy in Vancouver. Give all your love to one child. That's, I would like, well, that's a Chinese propaganda in Vancouver. But here, I haven't seen that here. So, you know, and having lived in Italy, having lived in Canada, and lived here, there is a robust voice here that's going on that I do not see anywhere else. And I know that people are, would like to protect more children, like to save their lives, but I don't know where else they're supposed to go. This is the country. We're not doing the best we can, but we're a huge voice here.
Yeah. We have another caller. Hello, Rita?
Yes.
Hi, where are you from?
Wyoming.
Wonderful. And what is your question?
Well, you spoke about the appealing to the conscience of the Nazis and Hitler would not have worked, right?
Right.
Well, why our bishops are not appealing to the conscience of Biden or even our Pope as to the direction he's taking this country further and further into a more culture of death instead of less?
I think, well, the United States Conference of Bishops, I believe it was Bishop Lopez, he came out with a statement early on and listed what aspects of the Biden administration were going to be troublesome. And I thought that was a pretty strong statement. Now, I don't think that was the same tactic that was taken by Pope Francis. Pope Francis congratulated him, used some vague language, pretty much within the diplomatic scheme, didn't say, give him a harsh scolding, but it was vague that you can interpret it like that. It wasn't as strong as Lopez. So Lopez came out with a statement that was just stunning. So I would Google that and pull that up.
Yeah, and it would be good for more of the bishops to speak up as well.
Absolutely, absolutely.
You know, and for all of us, you know, this is, it is a factor that needs to apply to the way we vote for any candidate. I mean, when I met the candidate for the mayor of Irondale, that was one of my questions. Are you pro-life or not? I mean, and it's also something that pro-life people need to be involved at every stage of government. School boards, really important, and get involved in these things. But the bishops could do a bit more.
There's also some political stirrings out there. In Texas, an evangelical Protestant minister has gotten, it's 9 or 10 sanctuary cities for the unborn. This using home rule charters to create a local constitution. Now, of course, there's the preemption doctrine, and that higher laws, the county or state or federal government preempt local. But if Roe versus Wade should be overturned, these home rule charters, these sanctuary cities as they're called, would take legal personality away from Planned Parenthood, meaning to say that they could no longer use the courts, and it would give legal personality to the unborn child. Giving legal personality to the unborn child was exactly the reason that we have abortion in the first place, because Blackmun, back in Roe versus Wade, said the children, the fetuses, and call them what you will, in the womb, have never enjoyed legal personality, the right to sue and be sued on their own behalf. They've always been, so they've never been recognized as a person, meaning having legal personality. But if these sanctuary cities across the United States give them legal personality, all of a sudden the Supreme Court could say, well, I guess maybe they are being granted legal personality in the United States. So there's some good things on the horizon too, Mitch.
I think there's also a cultural aspect here. If you look on the website for the Catholic Women's Forum, so it's a group of women, philosophers, theologians, mothers, you know, and they are creating a culture of life in this country, and that's through writing books, that's by having children, and talking about different aspects to promote a pro-life perspective through their activities with the media. And I think of Mary Hansen and Hasten. I think that people should be on their website because they're doing extraordinary things, and these women are extraordinary. And so I think the building of a culture of life it's got to take place along with the legal measures here. They go hand in hand.
Yeah, if you don't have a people who are educated to understand the rights of the unborn, then even changes in law will make little effect.
That's it.
You know, it just is not going to help. You have to have the law, and I think, so folks would understand, if Roe versus Wade were to become overturned, as a number of other very bad decisions by the Supreme Court have been overturned. The Supreme Court has a nasty history of bringing on attacks on human dignity. Dred Scott is a classic example. Plessy versus Ferguson. Dred Scott said that African Americans, don't have rights.
And Buck v. Bell said that disabled people or persons with disabilities, women should be forcibly sterilized for the good of society, that more of their own kind won't come into the world.
Right.
I heard that at the United Nations from China at the Disabilities Conference. Again, the Chinese delegate stands up and says, if you think about it, family planning is the best thing for persons with disabilities. I remember there was an Australian delegate that kind of smacked his head. He was kind of liberal, but he still said, leave it to the Chinese. The best thing for the disabled person is that not be more of them. Yeah. Leave it to the Chinese to put it out there.
But it's not just China. Iceland.
Yeah.
They celebrated they had, and so we have to prepare to not only have this overturned, because it's bad decision morally and legally, but also prepare us to be a people that accepts, these rights, because then we'll safeguard it. If we cherish the unborn, then we'll safeguard their lives and find them homes to live in. There are plenty of people that would love to have a child.
Absolutely.
And can't.
Absolutely.
So this would be a very important element of giving us human rights thinking.
Yes.
And justice thinking, and not allow the press to manipulate our emotions.
Yes.
This is key.
Yes.
I want to make sure, we're almost out of time. I want to make sure that we mention again, Ave Maria Law School, Ave Maria School of Law, is where you teach. It's a very vibrant law school, doing quite well. And if you want to find out more about it, you can go to AveMariaLaw.edu. AveMariaLaw.edu. So that's a very good thing. We have just a few seconds left.
Mitch, our founder Tom Monahan said the most important vocation in the world is to be a priest.
Yeah.
Put holy orders. The next he thought was to be a lawyer and put order in society.
There you go. Well, it's one thing you have to do. Thank you both for being with us. I appreciate
Thank
that.
you.
That you're here with us. And may the Lord bless all of you and fill you with his wisdom and his truth, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And we can bring you this program and all of our other programs only because the network is brought to you by you. This is how our Lord inspired Mother Angelica, instead of having commercials and all that. So please remember to keep us in between your gas bill, your electric bill, and your cable bill. And if you do, we'll be able to pay all of our bills too. God bless you and thank you.